David Smith here with yet one more flipped classroom math lesson. 3 tips before we start. First, remember that you can slow down or speed up the playback to suit your needs. Second, you can pause the video at any point to catch up with your notes or jot down questions. Third, you can turn on the captions and read my words on the screen. Today's topic, the midpoint formula. So this is another formula that we use with coordinate geometry. And just to know, coordinate geometry is geometry that's done on the coordinate plane. So we know the coordinates of certain points like corners of figures and things like that. So the midpoint of a segment lies halfway between the endpoints of that segment. So if I have a segment like this, I'm going to name my endpoints A, B, then the midpoint M is exactly halfway between. And the way we denote that on this figure is we put a tick mark on these two segments. So AM has one tick mark and so does MB. And since they each have just one tick mark, what that's telling us is that that length equals that length. And we can write that like AM equals MB. Okay, so that's the general territory. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move on toward where we identify the coordinates of these 2 points and then we find the coordinates of the midpoint. Okay? So, if M is the midpoint between A, and here we do these x1, y1, and B, x2, y2, then the coordinates of the midpoint is given by, I should say, R, right? These are plural coordinates, are given by x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2, comma, or parentheses. So I want to call your attention to this. These are coordinate points, so they have parentheses around the outside and a comma separating them. So the x-coordinate of the midpoint is given by this, and the y-coordinate of the midpoint is given by that. Okay, let's do a problem. Find the midpoint for A, which is negative 2, 3, and B, which is 4, 8. And I've put our midpoint formula up there for reference so we can use it. So just like with the distance formula, labeling our points with x1, y1, etc. is going to be helpful here. So x1, y1, x2, y2. That just helps make sure we don't get confused when we do our plug-in step, which comes next. Okay, so don't forget to write your parentheses and your comma. So x1 plus x2, that's going to be negative 2 plus 4 over 2. And then y1 is 3 plus 8 over 2. So now we have these 2 little algebra sections to do. It's not even algebra, actually, it's just computational. We need to resolve this number down, and we need to resolve that number down. So I'm going to bring down my parentheses. Minus 2 plus 4 is 2. And 2 over 2 is just 1. So that point resolves to 1. 3 and 8 are 11. 11 divided by 2 is 5.5. So the midpoint of this segment, of segment AB, is the point 1, comma 5.5. Okay, I want you to try one. 2 points, P, which is 3, 9, and Q, which is negative 2, 1. So go ahead and pause the video, plug those points into your midpoint formula, and reduce it down like we just did. Okay, let's see how that looks. Plug-in step. Here we go, x1, y1, x2, y2. So x1 plus x2, 3 plus negative 2 over 2, and then 9 plus 1 over 2. Now let's resolve that down. 3 plus negative 2 is just 1. So 1 over 2 is 1/2. 9 plus 1 is 10 over 2 makes 5. Okay, we're going to move on to a slightly more complicated problem that you might do with the midpoint formula. So instead of asking you to find the midpoint, they're going to give you an endpoint and the midpoint and ask you to find the other endpoint. Okay, so use midpoint formula to find the endpoint of a segment. So here's our example. For segment RS, so R and S are the endpoints of this segment. We know that R is 3, 1, and M, which is the midpoint, is 1, -3. Find the coordinates of S. Okay? So let's just do a straightforward plug-in step and see how that looks. We have x1, so this would be x1, y1, and then over here I could just write S is going to be, we don't know what S is, but it's x2, y2. There's some points that we're going to find those, but right now we don't know what they are. So x1 is 3 plus x2, which we don't know what that is, over 2. And then y1 is 1 plus y2, which again, we don't know yet what that is, but we know it's going to fit this formula. And this equals the midpoint. Now we know the midpoint. That is 1 minus 3. Okay? Now before we go further, I want to mention something because people get confused with this. Even though I've wrote this like an equation, it's got variables, looks like algebra, has an equal sign. Strictly speaking, this is not a valid equation because it's this little term here that equals that number and this little term here that equals that number. Because remember, this is the x-coordinate of the midpoint. So we know this is equal to 1, and that's the y-coordinate of the midpoint. So we know this phrase here, that expression, is equal to -3. So now we have two little equations to solve to find our coordinates for S. So the first equation is 3 plus x2 over 2 equals 1. Okay? So now we have to solve that for x2. Now my favorite way of solving fractions is to cross multiply. That really helps out. Okay. So here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to multiply both sides of this equation by 2 to cancel out that 2. So I'm going to multiply by 2 on both sides, and these cancel, and I get 3 plus x2 equals 2. Now all I need to do is subtract the 3 from this side, and I'll know what x2 is. x2, now minus 3 from both sides is going to equal -1. So my x2 coordinate of point S, we have the x-coordinate now, it's -1. So now let's do the same thing with this little expression right here. 1 plus y2 over 2, that's going to equal -3. Okay, because this is the y-coordinate of the midpoint, and we know, because that's the midpoint, it's going to equal -3. So let's do the same thing. We're going to multiply both sides by 2. So we cancel that out. We get 1 plus y2 equals -6. Subtract 1 from both sides. y2 equals -7. Okay? So now I know the x-coordinate of point S is -1 and the y-coordinate is -7. So I could write S -1, -7. Now that you've watched the video, jot down some notes or questions for our next class. You can also re-watch the portions of the video that you didn't understand so well the first time. If you enjoyed the video, please click like, and if you'd like to help me grow my YouTube channel, please click subscribe.